Hello, Portland State University, Ratio Christi. This is Alexandra Carroll, and I am very sorry that I'm unable to be with you today in person. I am currently, well, at the time that you're watching this, I will be tromping around in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, hopefully evading most of the bears and mountain lions and whatever else is going to be happening there, so wish me luck. I also apologize for the snotter fall that is my face. I am pretty ill with a cold, so if I'm sneezing and coughing during this video, I sincerely apologize. Phlegm. So, I am the director for Ratio Christi for Colorado. We're on 3 campuses out here, and I have probably met some of you already. I was out there in Portland last April, I think it was, for the Fearless Week, which was a lot of fun. If you weren't at the Fearless Week, ask someone who was there, and they will fill you in. It was a really cool week-long event. So today I've been asked to speak to you on New Atheism. And the topic I'd like to discuss is really what's new about New Atheism, what makes it different from the atheism that we know and love, its predecessor, and really how does it work and how does it not work. And I sent some handouts that you should maybe have in front of you, and you can kind of follow along and take notes as you wish. So there's really 5 questions that I'd like to discuss about New Atheism. One of them, why did it arise? Of course, what's the origin of it? And who or what is influencing New Atheism? What's the driving force behind that ideology? Also, what's new about it, as I mentioned before, what makes it different, what makes it distinctive from other ideologies in its class, and ways that it works, ways that it doesn't work. We'll look at both from a philosophical standpoint. All right, so let's tackle the background. So I find it very interesting that the first atheists, historically, were Christians. Yeah, the first group of people to ever be called atheists were Christians in Rome who did not ascribe to the Roman gods. So they were called godless. They were called without the gods, or atheist. And later on, much later, in 1789, that term got a different meaning. In 1789, as my historian friends will know, that was the beginning of the French Revolution. And the old order was seen as oppressive, and the revolution kind of broke down those social class groups. It was seen to be very progressive. Do you see any shadows of this in our modern times? Any shadows of the old order is oppressive and the new order is liberating? That might be something that you can discuss in your group as well, even just with some of the music that's out there, some of the music that you kids listen to. Like, take me to church, take me to church, I'll worship like a dog. I'm not going to sing for you, especially with my cold. That's just a terrible idea. I will spare you. But, yeah, it'd be cool to discuss in our particular culture, Western civilization, what are some old order things that are seen as oppressive. Fast forward a little bit. We come to the 1960s. In the 1960s, the top anthropologists, psychologists, sociologists all believed that religion would give way to a new age, sort of another enlightenment, if you will, and that the infantile illusion of religion would be outgrown. For example, in China, I actually lived in China for a year as a professor at a university there. And in the early 1960s, it was assumed that all religion would be eradicated from the country, never to return. And I find it very interesting that the Chinese church is the fastest growing church on the face of the planet. Kind of an interesting paradox there. All right, let's move forward a little bit from the 1960s. Let's come forward to September 11th. Now, this is really where we get into the new of New Atheism. Because on September 11th, 3 of the main atheist books that were New Atheism literature, considered New Atheism literature, were begun the day after 9/11. That means that those three authors began composing those works the day after 9/11. I think that's very significant, and you should too. People see the radicalism at the fringes of religion sometimes and assume that that applies to the entire religion as a whole, or the ideology, whatever you will. And this might be why New Atheism seeks to stamp out religion as a whole, as a way of preserving society, preserving the earth. Religion is seen as bad and dangerous. All right, so that's kind of the background of New Atheism. Let's keep that in mind as we move forward. Second idea here, what are the influences of New Atheism? Now, there's three kind of main arenas of influence that I would like to discuss. First, people, then ideas, and then geography. So, people. Anyone heard of the Four Horsemen? Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Samuel Harris, and the late Christopher Hitchens. Those four men have been affectionately termed the Four Horsemen. The idea is they, through their efforts, will bring about the end of religion, in particular Christianity, the apocalypse, if you will. Samuel Harris, if you're not familiar with him, he claims that science does give a base for ethics, and that science is international, it's very profitable, therefore we should trust it. It should be an authoritative force. It benefits humanity regardless of where it goes, he would argue. As a scientist, not sure I can agree, but we will get into that later. Second horseman, Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins has more of a crusader mentality, so he recommends what's called a militant atheism, which means the active eradication of religion. He was a proponent for a short while of not allowing any student who had a religious affiliation to enter the university, because their lack of intellect would sully, in a way, academia. So we needed to eradicate or prevent any students entering university who ascribed to a religion. That has been shot down, obviously. He says this, quote, "It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane." He wrote The God Delusion. He instructs atheists to mock Christians as hard as they can in order to quiet them, which I find interesting. So you see there's kind of a difference between him and Samuel Harris, where Dawkins is very militant, very aggressive in his writings and in his claims. The third one, Daniel Dennett, he encourages the hatred of Christians in particular, and anti-respect aggression. So he says, we've got them on the run and we're almost there. He believes that religion will sort of die out by the end of his lifetime, I believe. Now, Christopher Hitchens. Unfortunately, we've lost him. He has passed away in the last couple of years. He says in one of his works that he is not an atheist, but an anti-theist. There's an important distinction there. An atheist versus an anti-theist. Whereas atheism in the Greek might be translated without God, anti-theist is actively against theism, against the idea of there being a God. Important distinction. Christopher Hitchens has an interesting history. If you read on his past, you will come to discover that he had to identify the dead body of his mother, who was killed by a priest. I believe he was 9. What impression does that have on a child? I think it's no wonder that he moved on in his adulthood to create the Religion Poisons Everything movement. Religion poisons everything. It must be eradicated for our own safety. That's the idea behind much of his writings. I won't get into all of his writings. He's written prolifically. I would encourage you to read everything he's written except for The Missionary Position, which is a terrible book. Anyways, do you notice anything similar about these 4 men? Anything similar at all? They're all wealthy, middle-aged, white men. I find that interesting, but we'll get into that again later on. The main leaders of this ideology of New Atheism fit into that category. Rather wealthy, male, middle-aged, and white. That's where the majority of the literature is coming from. All right, so we've talked about the influential people. Now let's talk about influential ideas. Fear is the context of New Atheism. When you read a piece of literature that is anti-theistic in nature, it uses a lot of language that is fear-based. For example, words that I've picked up on: oppression of religion, abuse, religion is child abuse, evil. These are all used to describe Christianity in particular. Most of them are anti-religious, but really in particular very anti-Christian. Christian seems to be the biggest problem in the minds of the Four Horsemen. Now, what has made New Atheism so attractive in our time? A lot of people are ascribing to New Atheism. It has clever slogans, the use of ridicule, which is kind of refreshing, honestly, in a society that promotes political correctness. I think a lot of us are very sick of being politically correct, and New Atheism is not. It tells it like it is, which a lot of people love. It shows no respect for the opponents. And not only is that really fun to watch on a YouTube video or something like that, I'll get into that later, but it might be easier to mock someone than it is to be chivalrous. Let's just say that for now. There are three major realms of attack: an intellectual attack, a moral attack, and a scientific attack. The intellectual attack is basically this: New Atheism is superior in every way, intellectually, to ideologies that ascribe to theism, pantheism, monotheism, whatever. If you are religious, you are stupid. That's the idea. Moral attack. Going back to Christopher Hitchens, religion poisons everything. It is evil to believe in God. It is wrong to believe in God. God was an evil, power, warmongering, masochist, whatever. It is morally questionable to adhere to a religious faith. The third one, scientific attack. Christians can't do science. Don't even try. Christians are terrible scientists. I hear this a lot as a scientist and a Christian. There's really no basis for it philosophically. I know a lot of Christians who do great science, but basically the idea is you can't be intellectual if you're religious, and you certainly can't be scientific, because we trust science and we don't trust religion, so you can't have religion and science together. Do you see kind of the juxtaposition there of that? One thing to pay attention to in New Atheism is fundamentalism in atheism. For the first time, atheism used to be more kind of free form. You kind of build your own atheistic ideas as you will. But in the New Atheism, it's highly fundamentalist. So often more fundamentalist than Christianity, I find. And these attitudes are starting to be seen in science in general. There was a study done on this kind of with atheist doctrine, if you will. A lot of people kind of ascribed to the same line of thinking, and a lot of them are traced back again to the Four Horsemen. Now, Larry Taunton did some research to find why New Atheism is becoming so attractive, and he found two main things. Number one, every atheist came to New Atheism because of a bad experience in the church. So it's not that people are choosing New Atheism because they don't know anything about Christianity. It's quite the contrary. It's that they have seen it face to face and they abhor it, and they have moved as far away from it as they can. Many churches are anti-intellectual and things like that, as I'm sure you know. Number two that Larry Taunton found was this: when asked why people stopped going to church, they could not or would not answer. There's a possibility here that it's more about emotion than reason. Just a possibility, and I want to throw that out there for you to think about. All right, geographical influences. The main New Atheism thrust is in the Anglo-Saxon world. It's not surprising to see an influence from France, as I'm, remembering back to the French Revolution and all of that. Old oppressive order, done with that. New order, enlightenment coming our way. The London Brights is the biggest atheist association in England, but the highest number at the meeting was 33 people, which is not very much. If you go to a church, any old church, you'll probably find more than 33 people. So it is quite solitary. New Atheism is very attractive in its ideas, but not as attractive in its community, it seems, just speaking from a sociological perspective. It doesn't generate community at all. There were only 2 meetings. In 2009 was the last time they met. So there's some media presence there, but not a lot of social traction, it seems. All right, what's new about it? Let's talk about that. Third idea on our point list here, moving right along. Distinguishing features of New Atheism include the following. Anger. A high level of anger. Is some of this anger valid? Yeah, probably. I think so. I have met many New Atheists who have very valid issues with the church or with Christians as a whole. McGrath writes this, Alistair McGrath. He's a Christian apologist who used to be a New Atheist. He says, New Atheists are not just angry about inconvenience of religion's survival. They are angry that their theories might be wrong. Do you agree with him? Another thing to discuss later on in the meeting here. The survival of religion is a threat to New Atheism. It should not come as any surprise that religious people are picked out and picked on by the New Atheism movement. Also, the level of commitment is higher in New Atheism. Very high level of commitment. Gary Wolfe invented the phrase New Atheism, I think it was 2006 or 2007, because he noticed that difference. And atheism is just kind of an idea that you ascribe to. New Atheism is a lifestyle, a way of life. It's very active. The tone is different as well. Anti-theism seeks to shame people away from the faith. It's very intolerant, aimed to eradicate religion. As we discussed before, that's different than atheism used to be. Although, it is interesting, it's not too difficult to show that a lot of New Atheism is intolerant of Christianity, intolerant of religion, in the name of tolerance, certainly, but still extremely intolerant of Christian people, particularly Christian academics. Let's move on to the 4th point now. Does New Atheism make valid claims? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Probably the same can be said of Christians, wouldn't you say? Atheists are capable of being good people. Have you ever heard that? Atheists are capable of being good people. Do you agree or disagree? Well, I agree entirely. I think it's very silly when a Christian comes to me and says, well, atheists can't be good because they don't believe in God, so they can't be good people. They can't do anything nice for anyone else. Dostoevsky said this. He said, if there is no God, everything is permissible, which is philosophically sound, but it's often misinterpreted to mean that atheists can't behave at all, which is not true. Of course they can. Of course they can be moral. Of course they can have ethics. That's not the question. The question is where they're deriving those morals from, where they're deriving those ethics from. We all bear the image of God, don't we? If you believe in the Imago Dei, that God has written himself on every single human being, it can be undermined, it can be covered, but it's still there. I would argue that. Here's another one. Christianity is a departure from reason. Have you heard an atheist say that to you? I certainly have. You have to believe in a fairy tale if you're going to accept God. Well, many theologians are confused about the nature of faith and where it comes from. Is faith the absence of reason? Some theologians have written that it is. One example is Karl Barth, who's very anti-apologetics. I love him as a theologian. I've read a lot of his literature. But some Christians would say there's a danger in trusting your reason, that faith means not trusting reason at all. So there might be a point there as well. There are a lot of other things that do work about New Atheism I won't get into for the sake of time, because I do want to give you plenty of time to discuss. But let's look at what doesn't work about New Atheism. Sorry, I need to wet my whistle. Much better. What doesn't work about New Atheism? Well, Richard Dawkins says that we have already won the quest to destroy Christianity. I'm not sure. If you look at the numbers, it doesn't quite look like that. Last year, The God Delusion sold 950,000 copies in North America. Again, The God Delusion was one of Richard Dawkins' greatest hits as far as literature goes. And The Purpose-Driven Life sold 28 million copies. 28 million copies of the good old Purpose-Driven Life. And that's compared to 950,000 copies of The God Delusion in the same area in the same time period. So there's still a longing for purpose. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but there are maybe some aspects of New Atheism that don't address purpose as well as they could. And there are many other things that I could get into. I'll put these on your sheet. Religion is evil. Well, it's not really... doesn't make a lot of sense to make a moral attack on Christianity. If you say God is evil, you have to have an idea of evil in your head. When you make that statement, where did that concept of evil come from? It must be external. If it's not external, then we all make up our own idea about evil, and how do you know what is evil and what is not evil? And if God doesn't exist, why spend so much time trying to disprove him? That's another thing that kind of confuses me about New Atheism. Now, the idea of delusion is another thing that people say is quite inappropriate to bring up in terms of attacking religion, saying that it is a delusion. We should have enormous sensitivity to the question of mental illness. But John Lennox says this, that atheism is a delusion because it's confused about the nature of God, and the nature of faith, and the nature of science. And John Lennox is a scientist himself. He's a mathematician. Another one, religion is just a crutch. Religion is for the masses, and we use it to control them. I'm sure you've heard that. But John Lennox says, if God's real, of course there's comfort in believing him. You shouldn't judge a person for finding comfort and meaning through their faith. Pretty good response. You were born into it. Christianity is unscientific. Christianity is harmful. That's a big one. Again, religion poisons everything. I'll leave these for you to discuss a little bit. Christianity as child abuse. Christianity as genocidal, being run by a genocidal maniac who's known as God. All of these things. But before I close, I just want to... introduce you to a friend of mine. This is Martin. He's a rat. Now, let's talk about Martin for a second. There are a lot of things that we can say about Martin. Science can tell us that he is Aratus norvegius, which is his scientific name, and that will tell me that he's domesticated. Mathematics will tell me that he's 15 inches long, and here, go play on the floor and don't get into trouble. 15 inches long and 8.1 ounces. Maybe he's a little overweight. That's what math can tell me about Martin. Spectrophotometry, if you know what that is, measuring color, will tell me that he has a maximal absorbance in the 530 nanometer spectral region. He's brown. Those are all things that science can tell me. But can science tell me why Martin is here? why Martin exists, why he is licking my toe right now. I certainly don't know the answer to that. I think my feet are disgusting. Scientism is a problem. What I mean by scientism is the idea that science answers every single question one can possibly ask. Science can tell me all about Martin, how old he is, how big he is, what he's been eating, but it can't tell me why he's here. And that is not a terrible philosophical conundrum, because he's just a simple rat. But for you and I, we should have issues with that. We should have issues with an ideology that doesn't tell us who we are or what our purpose is. I think every human being on this planet has at one point or another asked, why am I here and what is my purpose? Is it wise to ascribe to an ideology that cannot answer that for you? Maybe, but only if you can find something else that does answer it. So scientism doesn't answer a lot of questions about life, and many times when we try to answer those questions, we end up cutting each other's ears off. And this is what I mean by that. Aggressive responses to each other, Christian to Christian, or Christian to atheist, or atheist to Christian, however way you see it. We are deafening each other in conversation. This is an issue with the new atheism, and it's a trend that I would like to see changed at some point, especially in my own life. I've been guilty of that as well. So, take for example Peter. When Jesus is being taken away, Peter freaks out and he gets a sword and he cuts off the ear of a soldier. And that's a valid response, I think, to an attack. When you're attacked, you want to attack back. But Jesus heals that soldier's ear. He says, fight with the word. Yeah, that's sharper than any double-edged sword, I think. Fighting with the word. What does that really mean? What does that look like? I'm talking about the word with a capital W here, not just speech. You see, Jesus had authority to teach, and his teachings give us insight to those questions about life, about purpose, about meaning, that scientism, which is the modus operandi of new atheism, scientism can't answer those for us. In the end, what's the purpose? And we can shrug our shoulders and say, it doesn't matter, nobody thinks about that, and it's fine if we all just die in the end and turn into dust and whatever, it's fine. But at our very core, we know that's not an answer. It's not a good answer, at least. Let's remember to answer each other with respect and graciousness, and to be in the ear repairing business instead of the ear chopping business, if you will. And if we do so, I do believe we will find our purpose in more significant ways. So I suppose I'll leave it there, and I will try to call in for the Q&A, depending on where I'm at in my travels. So thank you so much for giving me an audience, and I look forward to discussing with you during the Q&A.